Hello, good afternoon. Welcome at the sixth webinar that KIT IP has been hosting since COVID started in the Netherlands. And today we're welcoming Huib Wursten as our guest speaker. And today's topic is, of course, very actual. If you looked at the Dutch news last night with all the messages about the curfew in Antwerp and about the nudging in Holland, trying to influence behavior of the Dutch population. Let me explain a little bit uh, about KIT for today. So this is today's topic, the 7 mental images. And actually, for those of you who don't know the KIT structure, let me explain. We have business units and we have knowledge units. And KIT Intercultural Professional is one of the business units. And what we actually do is we provide training. We have a little accident here, so just a second until we get the camera going again. In the meantime, let me explain to you that at KIT Intercultural Professionals, we actually feel that everything starts with awareness, that you have to become aware of your own preferences, your own habits and patterns, and your cultural heritage. And the good thing is that you can actually develop your intercultural competence. And that's what we help you with our trainings at KIT Intercultural. And at the same time, we'd like you to note that culture is not really limited to geographical borders. And actually, culture can also be a community. It can be subject to the nature of the business. And it also changes. We feel it changes. But I would like to ask Huib to comment on this.
Well, thank you, Edith. It's very nice to be invited here and to have an opportunity to discuss this with you. Yes, first of all, culture is changing. I think that's exaggerating what is happening. If you look at reality, if you look at, for instance, the Netherlands, we define the Netherlands sometimes as the polder model. And if you look back in time, if you go back to the 17th century, you will see that what we call a polder model was already in place in that time, meaning it goes back a long time. So what I prefer to say is that culture is not static. We have to adapt to new circumstances and new environments and so on, but it is consistent. If we are, if we need a different approach, well, the approach we develop is again steered by the values that are already in place. Then, secondly, you're making not the distinction between the different levels of culture, and I would emphasize that national culture is much more fundamental than the other elements of culture, because our educational system is embedded in the national culture of our home countries. And I'll give you an example, a short example, but a very important example. In our country, in the Netherlands, the moment children can communicate with the parents are saying to the children, well, speak up, say what you have in mind, you have a tongue. They are inviting the children to respond, to give their own opinion, to be independent in their thinking. And if you go to another culture, for instance, our neighbors in Belgium or in France, there this is seen as impolite. The message of parents to the children in these countries is, if you want to say something, you can politely raise your hand, and if you get a turn, you can say what you have in mind. But in the first place, you have to have high esteem for the older generation. Well, this type of culture is completely different if you look at the consequences. And what we found in our research is that after 10 years of being educated, being raised in a certain culture, your values are not changing anymore.
Right. So actually what you're saying is the values don't change, only the way it's being expressed is subject to the preceding time. All right. That's interesting. And well, actually, let me introduce you properly, because we're very happy to have you here. Huib has over 30 years of experience in intercultural management issues, and he was closely related to ITIM, actually the consultancy company before that introduced Hofstede in the Netherlands. But in the meantime, he has developed this model, and he has recently published this book. And he's recently published this book about the 7 mental images. And actually, the 7 mental images that you have developed based on Hofstede, that's what you will use today to point out to us the different ways of dealing with the COVID pandemic.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and for those of you who don't know me, I work as the HR business partner within the KIT Intercultural Professionals, and I have been a consultant and a trainer for a very long time. I have quite some experience living and working in Asia and also overseas in the States. But actually, I would like to give the floor to Huib because he has a lot of insights to share with us. But before we do so, I'd like to go through some logistics with you. We're using StormView, and that means that you have to look at the right top in your screen and you will see a few buttons. One button is people, and we only show the first names of people because we want to take into account the restrictions on privacy. You see a button polls. That's when we will ask you a few times throughout this webinar to give your view. And you see a button questions, and there you can put your questions. And I'm pretty sure that actually when Huib will share with us, we'll raise quite some questions. Now, if you see a question that actually resembles your own interest or that you find very interesting, please vote up the question, because at the end of the webinar, we'll take some time to pay attention to discuss the top questions. Yeah. So, Huib, please.
Well, yeah. I know by experience that talking about culture is highly sensitive, and before you know it, you're accused of being biased, or having prejudgments and so on.
Yeah.
So if we are talking about culture, we are talking about mainstream culture, about majority culture, but there are always exceptions. And there is, for instance, counterculture, youth culture, and suddenly, you can see examples of different behavior. But I'm talking about mainstream culture in general.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, if you would like to understand what I'm saying, I'm quoting a Dutch writer, Multatuli, who once said, "Nothing is completely true, and even that is questionable." Meaning, you have to make it a little bit relative. That is indeed, I think, what I like to emphasize.
Yes, you always have to see it in perspective and situation, take into
Right.
consideration. Now, you have called this "There's a System in the Chaos,"
Yeah.
and I believe you want to illustrate that with a video.
Yeah, well, if you look at the world is in turmoil at the moment, and what you see in this present days, in fighting COVID and fighting Corona, that a lot of things are the same everywhere, but also a lot of variation is taking place as well. And if you look carefully, you will see there is some system in the matrix. And I'll show you the interpretation from the Dutch side. This is, somewhere near to where I live in Amsterdam, and look at the behavior of people. Of course, there are traffic rules, but in the Dutch culture, people are supposed to make their own interpretation of the rules, and that is allowed based on to high moment. This is an example of the behavior in traffic. And the interesting thing is, I studied that video for a long time. Mostly no accidents, no problems at all. And the only problem I saw in this video is somebody, completely, apparently a foreigner who doesn't understand how to interpret the rules, and they are making a mistake. They are really the ones who create chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's a very interesting thing. And actually, you have 3 topics you would like to discuss, right?
If you look at culture, of course, culture is complex and have different implications. In this short introduction, I like to emphasize the way people, adhere to what the government is saying and applying the rules and adherence to the rules of what the government is saying. That's one thing. I like to emphasize, the role of experts in fighting Corona. And as you know, this is really a problem in the United States, and that's why I show this picture. There are lies, damn lies, an epidemiologist. This is quote from an article in the United States. I think people like Mr. Trump is thinking like that. And the next thing I will talk about also nudging. Nudging, it's really trying to influence behavior without giving them orders and so on.
Yeah.
That is also part of what I will discuss today.
All right. And we see here some examples of nudging, like the fly in the gentleman's toilet, right?
Can I give you one more
Yes,
practical
please.
example? I'm talking about my hometown, Amsterdam.
Yeah.
In the past, the garbage collectors, in Amsterdam,
Mhm.
did that during the night
Mhm.
because that's not difficult then for traffic and so on. But they discovered this is not really effective. Now they do it during the day. Why? People then sometimes are irritated about the garbage collectors, but they see cleaning is taking place, and as a result, the city is much cleaner than in the past because people are aware that cleaning is an important aspect. That is indeed.
And that it takes a lot of effort,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Oh. Now, actually, we would like to ask you something. Can I ask you to start the poll? Now that you have explained these 3 topics that you want to discuss,
Adhering to rules.
yes, adhering to the rules and the importance of experts and realizing or relying on your own interpretation. So we would like to ask the audience, which one has your preference? And we see a lot of votes coming in. And what would you say? Because we see very few people voting for the experts at the moment. It seems that the own interpretation is getting the preference. You see that rules and experts are now at the same level. What would you say, Huib, looking at these results?
Well, I would say that most people, in the audience think like the Dutch.
Yes, it looks
I like to illustrate that by, the way Mr. Rutte, and our outbreak management team is addressing people.
Yes.
It's called the intelligent lockdown, meaning now certain things are forbidden, but for the rest, people are supposed to follow their own conscience and their own responsibility. That's really important in this field, and that is the own interpretation of what is then happening, what can happen, and what could not, was not supposed to happen.
So actually, our government is relying on the validity of our own judgment.
Right.
Yeah, but still, we have some people who also adhere to rules, and also quite a few experts. And I noticed in the registrations that we have a lot of people from India that attend this webinar. So, could you say something about that?
Well, India is a country that is very hierarchical, meaning, the government is supposed to tell people how to behave and what to do and what not to do. And people in such a country, find that normal and I really then find it easy to follow up. That is indeed.
Well, let's see, because you are one of the people that actually took the theory of Geert Hofstede to the Netherlands. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Well, if you talk about culture, there are, of course, different stories around. People have their own experiences, and people tell stories about, cases of things that happened. That is, of course, very difficult to rely on these cases, if they are told and told by individuals. Mr. Hofstede started really, the really serious experimental and empirical research into culture.
Mm-hmm.
So what he did is he tried to find out by using empirical strategies and methodologies what the core issues are by using factor analysis, for instance. If people talk about diversity and if people talk about different approaches, what exactly is the core of what is different? And that's what he found. And what he found is not a one-time research. Research in the academia, it's very important that repeat research is happening and that people not try to prove what you're saying, but try to falsify what you're saying. And 50 repeats and again, his dimensions, the issues he found to be very fundamental, were more or less confirmed.
All right, and actually he came up with 4 dimensions, right?
Yeah, 4 dimensions. And the first one, and I would say also very important to understand in this period in time, And I saw that some people, from the European Union are also joining. What is important to understand why it is so difficult in the European Union. Well, the difficulty is because people score differently on power distance. Power distance is defined by the acceptance of an equal distribution of power, the acceptance of hierarchy. It's not about hierarchy as such, because you find that everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But most for instance, the Netherlands or in the United States, it is for convenience to make it easier to, more or less organize. But in cultures with a high score for power distance, people accept that things are decided top down. They accept that, there is a privilege for people at the top to make decisions and so on, and they wait for these decisions.
Yeah.
So it's about the acceptance. That is really important.
Right. All right.
The second one is about the direction of loyalty. In some cultures, people are supposed to be loyal to their in-group, their extended family, tribe, religious group, ethnic group, and so on. And in return, they are supported by the in-group.
Yeah.
And in these countries, it is really dangerous to have opinions and behavior not in line with the behavior and opinions of the in-group, because then they are seen as somebody who is really making difficulties, and then they are thrown out. At the other end of the scale, people are loyal to themselves, to their own ideas and so on.
Yeah.
It's called individualism, and it is important to understand that if you look at morality at the moment in the world, that morality is defined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this is about individual rights. Well, it's important to understand that this is setting the tone. Then there is a dimension about the direction of motivation. If motivation is coming from being competitive and competition and continuous competition, or if motivation is coming from consensus seeking and cooperation. Then there is one last element. It's about uncertainty avoidance. That is trying to deal with uncertainty, trying to find predictability. And what I find important to say already now is that even the thinking of people is involved, because in the countries scoring low on uncertainty avoidance, people are practice orientated, look at facts, look at practices, and define then what should be done by best practices. And people from the high end, they try to avoid being in chaos. They try to gather as much information as possible before they act. They are deductive in their thinking.
So they want to prevent taking risk.
Right.
All right. But you also have pointed out to us that it's very important not to look at these scales individually, and you have combined them into clusters. And actually, that's also what we feel at KIT, because we're always very scared to get stuck in stereotyping. Right? And actually, your system is combining the different scales, trying to bring diversity in it. Can you explain a bit more?
Yeah. What is important to understand is that Mr. Hofstede, who is really a giant, I mean, I'm standing on his shoulder, but he was a scholar. And for a scholar, in terms of methodology, it is important that all the dimensions he found are independent. Also a repeat research. But for practitioners, for consultants, it is really important to understand that these dimensions interact. And together they create a gestalt, as it is called in psychology. And that's creating a kind of rules of the game system, rules of engagement system. And I looked at the possible combinations, and I found 7 of these possible combinations leading to 7 different rules of the game.
All right, but today we will only talk about 6, right?
6, because Japan is standing alone. It's really special, but I will not discuss Japan in this, because it is not a cluster, it is standing alone.
All right, so if we look at it, in the meantime, you may already have some questions about the 7 mental images that I was just introduced. So please don't forget to raise your questions under the button. And if you see a question that is interesting to you, don't forget to upvote it. So, Huib, can you tell us a bit more about your 7 mental images, and then the 6 that you want to highlight today?
Okay, I make a difference between 2 clusters. I mean, if you look at the mental images, the hierarchical group, scoring high on power distance, I defined it already, and the egalitarian group, scoring low on power distance. And if you look at the hierarchical group, I will not reveal which countries these are because that it will be part of the poll.
Yeah.
But I'll give an example, a very, very important example of how you can see what your culture is like. The example of having meetings, what you expect a meeting to be.
Yeah.
And I'll give you examples one by one. If you look at what I call the solar system, these are countries where meetings are seen as places where the boss is having a platform to communicate decisions that are already taken on a higher level, and where the others can ask polite questions for clarification, or where the boss can ask people to discuss a certain thing, then people can have a lively discussion, but at a certain moment the boss is saying, okay, I heard what you said, this is my decision.
Right.
Then the second one and the third one, family and pyramid, are more or less the same.
Yeah.
There, actually, it is the boss having a platform to communicate decisions that are already taken on a high level to others. And I would say also the obligation of the boss is to give people briefings about what to do and how to do afterwards.
Yeah.
Then if you look at the egalitarian group, the contest model, that's reflected by the expectation of meetings. People see meetings as places you shortly meet to prepare for actions.
Yeah.
And if meetings are taking too long, people start getting, unrested and start getting irritated. They start yawning and they say, "Come on, I'm not paid to have meetings. I'm paid to take actions." Then there is a network system, and that's more or less the opposite of the contest in this sense.
Yeah.
People in these cultures see meetings as places you're invited to come to discuss, to put your own opinion on the table, to look for the confrontation of opinions.
Yeah.
And after a long discussion, people have the feeling, okay, good meeting, everybody had the right to speak up. Now we are coming to joint conclusions, and now the ones who did not speak up lost their rights to complain afterwards.
Yes. So
and then there is a
it.
last one, the machine model, where people see meetings as places where well-prepared people go to, with well-prepared expert information in order to come to a well-prepared, expert and balanced decision.
Right, more based on the content, right? Okay, we would like to know from you, dear audience, we start another poll, which of the systems actually reflects your culture? Let's see. Oh, wow. Yes. We see a lot of network at the moment, and also quite some pyramid, and the well-oiled machine. Contest solar system. Family is not very well represented, not at all, actually.
50, well,
yeah. No, the family. Family is. Oh, we have one now. 4%. Yeah. All right. Now, would you like me to reveal the countries that stick to your list? Yeah.
These are, examples of the countries I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the solar system, that's the combination of high power distance, centralization, and high individualism. And I'm talking about cultures like France, Belgium, the French-speaking part of Switzerland, the northern part of Italy, Poland, especially in the big cities, and Spain.
All right.
So if you look at the pyramid, that is more or less the majority, culture in the world.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the combination of high power distance and collectivism and high uncertainty avoidance. And then I'm talking about cultures like in Eastern Europe, like Romania, Bulgaria, but also in the whole of South America, in all Arab countries, all African countries are belonging to the pyramid system.
All right.
Then is the family system that is really different compared to the pyramid, only on one dimension, that is the uncertainty avoidance.
Yeah.
People are more flexible, are not afraid of surprises and things like that. And I'm talking about Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Thailand, India, and Taiwan.
Yeah.
Then in the egalitarian group, the contest model, that is all Anglo-Saxon countries. I call them Anglo-Saxons: USA, UK, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada.
Yeah.
The network system, clearly, that I'm talking about the Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands.
Yeah.
It's a cluster. It's not surprised that in the European Union they are together at the moment, trying to more or less defend their interest. And then in the machine model, I'm talking about Germany. I'm talking about the German part of speaking part of Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Austria.
So again, we see a lot of network scores. So it means our audience is maybe half Dutch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can.
right. All right. Now, if we go into detail about the hierarchical group, you have some examples, right?
Yeah. So if you look at the consequences for Corona and the approach to Corona,
Mm-hmm.
what you can see is in the hierarchical countries, they have some things in common. First of all, the centralized top-down decision making is happening, and the population, is accepting that
Yeah.
type of behavior. Um, in these countries, I mean, at one hand, people accept authority, accept more or less the power distance, but also in these countries, because they are also more or less afraid of the power of their power holders,
Mm-hmm.
also have difficulties in while giving negative feedback. In
Yes.
these countries, while people have a tendency to not to speak up, in terms of negative feedback, and as a government, you should be active in yourself in trying to trace what is happening.
Yeah.
There is a saying in these countries: people only only respect what you inspect.
Inspect.
So
Yeah.
inspection is a real more important issue.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And then again, you have mentioned the family.
Yeah.
And if we look at the families, what they have in common and what the
Well,
effective is on
people
corona.
are not afraid of threats. People are not afraid of surprises. I
Mm-hmm.
think people are relaxed about that,
Yeah.
and they have the feeling, we cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in China, for instance, also. I
Yeah.
mean, and in India.
Yeah.
People have a feeling, okay, let's see what's happening, and then.
Yeah.
And in these countries, the moment the government is at a certain moment discovering there is a real threat, then
Mm-hmm.
immediate top-down measurements, very strong, are ordered, and people adhere to that because people are afraid of causing disharmony with their environment.
Yeah.
They're afraid of being seen as different and so on. So people adhere to the rules.
So the reason they adhere to the rules is very different from the first one, from the pyramid, because the pyramid they feel vulnerable and they're scared, and here it's because they feel protected.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then, oh no, this is the pyramid. Sorry. If you look at the pyramid, what do they have in common?
Well, again, that they are afraid of insecurity, in uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
unfamiliar risks.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a tendency to first try to find the right information before they act. They
Mm-hmm.
refer also to experts, in terms of what exactly is happening, because they want to understand that before they are acting. And that is indeed making them different compared to, the first type of cultures. Well,
Okay.
I make a distinction also with, the cultures in Middle and Eastern Europe, because I just recently wrote an article about it. As a result of the fall of communism and
Yeah.
the failed privatization, especially in the first years, people in these cultures in general developed a lot of mistrust towards the power holders. Had the feeling new power holders more or less are the same as the old power holders. They have mistrust, and their feeling is of fatalism. And so let's see what is happening and so on. That is indeed very special for
All
people.
right. And then how do you explain what's happening now in Belarus with regard to the elections that are coming up?
Well, exactly. I mean, of course, if in these countries, let me formulate it a little bit in a more general way. In these countries, developments, new
Yeah.
approaches can only happen, if people, suddenly are really fed up
Yeah.
and revolt against the government.
All
That
right.
is only taking place in the hierarchical countries. Revolts are always because people, are not immediately reacting. Tension is rising, and suddenly it bursts.
Yeah.
And then you have a new government. The disappointing thing is always, after the Arab Revolution, for instance, and so
Yeah.
on,
The spring.
and
Yeah.
the Russian Revolution, that the real and the new management, the new power holders, are having more or less the same traits as the old power holders, because culture is not that rapidly changing.
That's what you said before, right? Then we have the solar system. And what is the effect of the corona from the solar system?
Well, that's quite interesting, because I'm talking now about Italy. I'm talking the northern part of Italy, especially
Mm-hmm.
France and Belgium, our neighbors, from
Mm-hmm.
the Netherlands. People accept an equal distribution of power. I mean, look at the map of France, you see the consequence. Even on the map of France, all roads even go to Paris. It is highly centralized, and the president is at the top of the pyramid and is supposed to speak up. But people in these cultures are also individualistic, meaning that people have a reference to their rights. And as a result, they have a tendency, to more or less listen to the power holders, not to protest. But what they do is, and that's called in Belgium, in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, je eigen plan trekken, to draw your own plan. System D is called in France, meaning, to not to protest against the government, but more or less to do it in their own way. And in these countries especially, it is very important, and you see that also in reality, that the government is inspecting. People only respect what you inspect. And the fines, trespassing, the orders of government in France and Belgium are sky high. It's really...
you mentioned an example about how many breads you buy.
Right.
Yeah. All right. And then if we look at the egalitarian group, then what do they have in common?
Yeah, well, the egalitarian group, of course, they have governments, and a government is also seen in these governments as an important factor in regulating societies. I mean, of course. But together with other societal stakeholders, like scientific institutions, local authorities, GGD's in the Netherlands, they're also supposed to play a role in the decision making. And together they are responsible, for what is happening. That is really important to understand. It is not a top-down, it is together we are dealing with direct intervention is accepted. I mean, of course, but only if the people at the top can convince the others that there is a real reason for the intervention.
Yes, they need to understand the need to do it. Right? Yeah. All right. Now, if we compare that to the well-oiled machine, then what do we see?
Well, in the well-oiled machine, I'll compare it with the previous crisis, the financial crisis. In both cases, there was, a question, where the hell is Angela? Meaning that in Germany especially, people, of course, they are scoring high on certainty avoidance. They try to create security. They try to do things that are predictable. But then if there is a crisis, they are not reacting immediately. No, they want to understand what is happening. So where the hell is Angela? That was the heading of an article in The Economist during the financial crisis. Angela, the leaders, they want to understand first the principles of what is happening before they act. And then they act in a very, very orderly way and, in a very systematic way.
Yeah. All right. And then we look at something that's really very interesting, because here you mentioned contest, and that's what we see very clearly in the States. You already mentioned something about the experts and the way they look at experts there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the consequences of a low score for uncertainty avoidance in combination, by the way, with masculinity, it's important to understand that they have a way of thinking that's called pragmatism. And I'll give you a quote from what's called the father of pragmatism, a philosopher called William James. He said, "Truth is when it works." People really are not interested in theory. They are interested in the practical side. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. That's what they are saying. And truth is when it works. That is what Mr. James said. They focus on actions and the consequences. And people having a theory, are really having a low esteem. They are called academics, and it being called an academic, also in our work, that's not a compliment. Mr. Obama, was called, even in the New York Times, he is too professorial. And that is not a compliment. And if in the press in the UK and in the United States, you are called an intellectual, that is really an insult. People, like Kov, the one who is now the man of Johnson in the UK, is was Minister of Education, and at a certain moment in the speech he said, well, schools should not look at universities, for further education, because universities people and university educated people are much too abstract. No, they have to do it themselves.
So actually, it is whatever works.
whatever works. And
Right.
experts are really, well, suspicious in
Yeah.
this sense.
Well, the last one of this egalitarian group is actually the network, and that's where we will focus on the Netherlands, I think,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
a lot of new arrivals in the Netherlands are really wondering. I already saw a question: why don't the Dutch wear masks? So please explain to us.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that's difficult because people. No.
No,
Let me start by
yeah.
an example. If and I'm talking about medical care. In Amsterdam, where we live and where we are now, it's known that people in Amstelveen, one of the suburbs of Amsterdam, people from expat communities prefer to go to the doctor in Belgium or in Germany if they have a health problem. Why? If you go to a medical doctor, a family doctor in the Netherlands, and you say, "Doctor, I have such a pain here," the first question a medical doctor in the Netherlands is asking is, "What do you think yourself is happening?"
Yeah.
And for people with a high uncertainty avoidance,
Yeah.
that is really disaster. He does not know what he or she is doing.
No.
And in the high uncertainty avoidant countries, then a doctor is, giving a specification, and then you get a pile of recipes like this, and you go to the pharmacy and you get such a bag with recipes, and people feel very satisfied because it's taken seriously.
Yes.
And they have a feeling that in the Netherlands that's not taken seriously. The mouth masks are more or less in the same way. I mean, our experts are not really certain, are not really secure that it is helping. In terms of nudging, yes. So
Yes.
wearing a mouth mask means, in the Netherlands, they are saying it might help because of making you aware there is a special situation.
Yeah.
But in terms of, well, if mouth masks, especially the non-medical mouth masks, are helping, they are really saying, also in the open, that's also part of the Dutch understanding.
Yeah.
Well, we don't know. So
Yeah.
people really then.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, it's all about your own outlook on things and your own weighing the facts. But still, we have a shared interest, and people are sensitive to nudging because they can see the shared interest and the need to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say something about the polder model. I mean, the Dutch way of thinking.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is also valid for a big part, also in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway.
Yeah.
So I will go to a question, where I think it starts if you want to understand the Dutch and want to understand the Danish and the Swedish way of thinking. And it's about motivation. So what I will do is I will make it a poll also for the audience.
Yeah,
you can,
right.
perhaps
But
you can
first,
show.
I would also like to mention something, because actually this is a slide that we very often use. As many people know, we have this program, it's called Understanding the Dutch. It's for new arrivals in the Netherlands. And we always explain to them what the origin of the polder model is, and that it means that you have an individual objective, but also you have a shared goal and you have a shared interest. And the shared interest in this case was keeping the water out. And that's how the polder model actually started. And in the meantime, yeah, that's also the way we conduct our politics. And it has even been introduced in economy. And in a way, our polder model has become like an export product, right?
Sure.
Yeah. But I know you have a poll about this, right?
Right, because I studied especially the Dutch Scandinavian system.
Yeah.
And I had a feeling it is very basic to understand work motivation for people. Why are you doing things and how can you be motivated? How can you motivate your colleagues in doing things? And I gave people 4 choices. And I asked that question in the countries involved, in Norway, in Denmark, in Sweden, Netherlands, and as a control group also in Germany, in the UK, and the USA.
Yeah.
I gave people 4 options. The question is, how can you be motivated? First, by stimulating leadership.
In the meantime, we will start a poll on that, because we're also curious how our audience will look at this. Yeah. So while you explain, yeah.
So how can you be motivated? For instance, by stimulating leadership, having a boss who is very good in developing strategies and also good in communicating these strategies downwards.
Yeah.
Or are you motivated by having material reward systems in place, bonus systems and so on?
Yeah.
Or are you motivated if there are career systems in place so that you know beforehand already, if you are working for an organization, what your next career step will be if you are really performing? Or are you motivated by having autonomy in your own workplace and planning your own tasks? Well, again, perhaps we have a poll and.
Oh, yes, we see that many, again, the Dutch audience is very visible because a lot seem to want to be motivated by having autonomy and taking care of their own tasks. Yeah, you see that? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, in Huib's book, if you're interested, on page 111, there is an individual test. You can assess yourself on these mental images and also these questions that you just posed. But now, how does this compare again to what's happening with COVID?
Well, again, I mean, if you look at stimulating leadership, that is especially important in, for instance, the high power distance cultures, really important.
Yeah.
Material reward system, bonus system is mostly very important, for Anglo-Saxons in the contest model. I hear quite a lot of Americans, in international companies saying, how on earth can you be motivated in a country like in Sweden or in the Netherlands with the tax system you have? That's robbery. For them, it is related. And for, then career opportunities, the funny thing is, I asked, of course, of organizations in the Netherlands, the real Dutch organizations and Swedish organizations, if they had a career system in place. Most companies don't have a career system.
No.
If you want to move, you have to do it yourself.
You have to do it yourself, right?
But having autonomy in your own work place and planning your own tasks, then people really recognize what is happening. And if you allow me, Edith, I have a comparison, and I discovered that people have an aha-erlebnis if I give this comparison.
Yeah.
What I say is, your Scandinavian and Dutch colleagues, you have to imagine as shopkeepers in a shopping mall.
Yes.
As you can understand, is that shopkeepers in a shopping mall first and overall concentrate on making their own shops effective.
Yeah.
And they don't want to have interference of their other shopkeepers, because what the hell do they know about what they are doing?
Their own business.
And also these people don't want to have interference of the management team of the shopping mall, because what the hell do these people on that level know what they are doing in the shop?
Yeah.
But the moment they have autonomy, well, the shopkeepers, of course, want to participate in the policy making of the shopping mall together, because that's shared interest. Your word.
Yes.
That's a shared interest. So autonomy is the alpha and omega of understanding behavior. People see themselves as autonomous and are treated as autonomous shopkeepers.
Yeah.
And in the Netherlands, very interesting for the Dutch here and the people working in the Netherlands, we have a very important word for it. It is even not Dutch.
No.
We have that from our colonial times, from Indonesia. It's called toko. And you hear a lot of people saying to each other every day, well, this is my toko. Don't interfere in my toko. Stay away from my toko.
Yes.
That is, the moment people accept it in their autonomy, then they are really participating in the decision making, and then they are heard.
Yes, because they have the shared interest that people come to the shopping mall.
Right.
Yeah, so that's again the nudging. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Now, actually, you have another video for us, right?
Well, can I introduce that?
Yeah.
In terms of behavior, the government has to be careful, because people have a strong reluctance for interference by the government, by ruling.
Yeah.
People have the feeling, oh, I can be the judge of my own situation.
Yes.
So, for instance, as an example, if you think that people on bikes will stop always, for red lights in Amsterdam, you'll be in trouble.
Yes.
So that's called, even with an official word, it is already there for centuries, a Dutch crossing.
Yeah.
A Dutch crossing is a word from aviation, where there are official rules, but in reality, people do it in a different way.
Yeah.
It's called the Dutch crossing.
Yeah.
And that is indeed the system in the chaos in there.
Yeah.
In this. So I'll give you an example of how this is solved in terms of traffic.
Yeah.
This is also quite close to where I live. It is about the shared place in front of the railway station, where the ferry is landing, and see how people are behaving, and in the past there were rules about what to do and what not to do.
Yes.
And what you can see is people find their own way, take their own responsibility, and mostly it's going very well.
Yes.
Seldomly there are really
no
excellent.
collisions, no
No
collisions.
collisions and so on. People are supposed to really be alert and to take their own responsibility.
Yeah, right. We have run a bit over time, but
Yeah.
I hope that our audience is still there, because then we take a few more minutes
Sure.
to answer some questions.
Yeah.
Yes. Can we see? Please don't forget to upvote. Last chance to upvote questions. Let's see. What do we have? Well, how do you explain the differences in response to the COVID-19 between Sweden, Norway, and Denmark?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking not about, well, that all the countries involved are the same, but they are similar.
Yeah.
But sometimes they have different, priorities. And I know that the Danish, have their priority saving their own population.
Yeah.
They are having this, feeling that the own population should be protected. That is our first priority.
Yeah.
And in Sweden, well, the priority was, the low score for uncertainty avoidance.
Yeah.
Well, we are not going to interfere in the autonomy of people, let people alone, and so on. That is so. There are relative variations.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. All right. And another question we have is actually fighting against water is the basic of the I can't read it, consensus in the Netherlands, but you don't have a conflict with your neighbors because you might need them to fight against water. Think of the terrible flooding in 1953 in Zeeland.
Meaning there is a shared interest, and I know people from the whole of the country were trying to go there to help the other people. And I have some information. I was involved in thinking about the water management in the USA. And the Dutch water system is really important and is well known everywhere.
Yeah.
And the Dutch organization discovered it is very difficult in the USA to protect flooding together.
Yeah.
Why? Because the people being elected, the politicians, are only elected in their own district. And they are supposed to be responsive to their own voters.
Yeah.
And what is happening in the other district, that's not their concern.
All right.
That is really,
all right. So that's one of the differences. Now, do we have we already answered the one about the mondkapjes, right?
Yeah.
Here's one. As a Mexican, I have problems to accept the description made here in the pyramid model. Have you also considered the diversity within the country?
Diversity. I mean, I'm talking about the bell curve.
Yeah.
So it's really always,
we all know the bell curve, right?
Yeah. But Mexico is a very interesting example because I worked quite a lot for a famous customer like IBM.
Yeah.
And I've been, I think, to 35 countries only for IBM in giving people training. For instance, Guadalajara in Mexico.
Yeah.
And well, they are under influence of Americans, of course, because of
the corporate culture
and so on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you see the difficulties. Well, the Americans are saying to the Mexicans, you have to be empowered. You have to take your own initiative and so on. And that creating a lot of problem in Mexico because Mexicans are top down and indeed expect the boss.
They're waiting for instructions. Yeah.
And I like to also avoid a misunderstanding. If I talk about a high power distance, I'm not talking about authoritarian behavior. No, it is actually the opposite. A good boss in a country like Mexico is taking care of people in return for their loyalty. And that caretaking is going much further than what people in individual countries are doing.
And actually, to answer this question, Martha, like Huib already indicated, it's the bell curve, right? So when we're talking about these averages, we're talking about the 68% in the middle. It's like when there's a program on TV and you think it's a silly program and nobody wants to watch it, be sure that 68% of the population thinks it's a wonderful program. If not, it wouldn't be there, because that means that you're either in the top percentage or in the bottom percentage. And that's the bell curve we're talking about. Right. Another question. Do we have another one?
Collectivism and individualism to public health.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there is an influence. And if you look at two extremes, I mean, I'm talking about, for instance, the United States as an individualistic culture.
Yeah.
people talk about an equal playing field.
Yes.
People have their own chance. They are supposed to compete, and there is no feeling of that the others should be helped and should be supported. People in these countries are reluctant to pay taxes for people that are disadvantaged.
Yeah.
So that you see in healthcare in the United States, they talk about single-payer healthcare systems, you know, the Obama system, and people are having a good position, you know, and being then insured.
They're in the top end.
Well, they are saying, well, I pay my insurance. I'm not going to pay for people with, you know, drug problems and so on. They have a feeling, well, this is not right.
Yeah.
And that is indeed individualistic. In collectivist countries, that is different. And what you see in collectivism, and that is sometimes a positive aspect, but also sometimes a negative aspect, people are loyal only to their own in-group.
Yeah.
So in these countries, people, you know, are supporting the people of their own region, their own, you know, ethnic group, their own religious group.
Yeah.
But for others, that is different. And I'm not going to help them. That's indeed what.
Yeah. 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 All right. I think we have to wrap up because we have already run over our 3/4. And please.
Can you scroll to Fernando, because Fernando is a very important colleague of mine. Can you scroll to this last one? The bottom one.
All right, and also I would like to show you the registration for our next webinar, because please keep track of our website and register for the next webinar. And Huib, once again, thank you so much for introducing your 7 mental images to us and relating it to what's happening with COVID. And we're looking forward to see you again at the next webinar. Keep track of our announcements on our website and register for the newsletter. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Bye.